Good evening, everybody. Yehuda Shamroth here in the dark, not literally, but not figuratively. I've got some technical problems tonight. Yehuda Shamroth introducing Rabbi Pinchas Winston on Redemption Thursdays, as I try to do every week, and the Rabbi tries also out of the kindness of his heart and his brilliant Torah. We can't live without it, so that's why we beg him every week to please continue. Tonight's topic is Pinchas, Eliyahu, and redemption, and please look into Rabbi's all his Torah teachings from many, many years past and recent on his two websites, sharnunproductions.org and 36.org. And thank you for joining us again. We really appreciate it, Rabbi Winston.
Thank you. Okay, this week's parsha, they're very, very important. Last week's parsha was Parshas Balak, which has the whole story of Bilam, but Bilam sees Achris Yamin. He sees into the end of days. There's a lot of, in Kabbalah, there's a lot of hints, a lot of information, a lot of details that to do with redemption, the end of days, that if you take the time to study them, a lot of insights come out of it. And these are, even though Bereshis is where a lot of the action takes place that we're familiar with, the story of Yosef and his brothers and the development of the Avos into the Jewish people, that seems to be like the main thing, of course, by part, Sefer Shmos, which is the Jewish people themselves, and the giving of Torah. But the Midbar, which we know has a great narrative and a lot of interesting stories, a lot of people don't really see it in terms of insights about the end of days. But it's very much so, and divine too, for that matter, if a person knows where to look. But specifically in this week's parsha, right, it starts off with God vindicating Pinchas. Why did he have to vindicate Pinchas? Because Pinchas did last week's parsha by killing Cosby and Zimri and Cosby, the perpetrators of the sin that caused the plague that killed 24,000 from the tribe of Shimon, and the whole episode caused 176,000 other people to be involved in Avodah Zarah. So 200,000 Jews died altogether. It's a large, huge amount of people in a very short period of time have been killed like that. It was messy. It was very, very messy. In a place called Shittim, which the Gemara says is called Shittim, according to one opinion, because like the word shtus, because of stupidity, dumb stuff, things that shouldn't happen, but they happen anyhow. And Pinchas is the hero. He's the hero of the story. He's the one who, he sees what's going on. He remembers the halacha of being a zealot on behalf of God. He gets up and he risks everything because it's brought down that if he were to have killed them one moment before or one moment after the act, then before he would have been either way would have been a murderer. Okay. He can only be a zealot at the time of the act itself. And if Zimri defended himself at any point in time from what was going on, he would not be guilty of killing Pinchas. It's a very tricky thing. This idea of zealousness on behalf of God requires tremendous devotion and sacrifice and willingness to put oneself on the line for God at all costs. And not just that, but because of the fact that if he had done the act incorrectly and not fulfilled the mitzvah properly, he could have lost his portion in the world to come as well. So he would have lost his life in this world and lost the portion of what to come. It was like a hair's breadth between, and a lot of times that's what it comes down to, between the hero that saves the day and the villain that causes things to go wrong, or with the villain, but making a mistake causes more good. That's part of being a zealot on behalf of Hashem. But as the Gemara points out, it took 6 miracles for Pinchas to be successful, which makes it even, the odds of succeeding even less so, because of the fact that it means without the miracles he would not have succeeded. But that's the point, is that everything we do anyhow is with Hashem's help, and if a person puts himself on behalf of Hashem, so then they get even extra help on top of that. And as the Vilna Gaon points out, the person is involved in redemption, involved in geula, so they can be helped out many, 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 many more times in the effort they actually put in, even 1,000 times more. So that's what happened with Pinchas last week and this week's. But when after first of all, he wasn't a Kohen. Okay, even though he was born from Elazar, who was born from Aaron a Cohen, and Elazar was a Cohen, his father. It's a little strange. But he was not, because only someone born to Elazar or his brothers after God established the kahuna belonging to Aaron's descendants. So then they could they could born a Cohen. But since Pinchas was already born at the time that this was pronounced, so therefore he missed the cut. He was left out. So he could not be a Cohen. But because of the fact that he did this act, he became a Cohen, which raises the question how he's able to do that for two reasons. Number one is how did it reverse the situation that he was now included to become a Cohen as well. And the second thing is a Cohen who has blood on his hands, who kills somebody, even for the right reasons. Even the Shem Shemaim can't practice as a Cohen. So how is Pinchas able to be a Cohen? Shem says he has bris kahuna forever. From this point onward, he and his children after him are all going to be Kohanim. And he becomes a Kohen Mashiach, the one who leads the Jewish war against Midian. And how is it possible? So the truth is the Balaturim, who not a Pashtan, not like someone who comes to give you the simple explanation, like Rashi, for example, or even the Ramban, who it's not really even the Ramban. Brings he alludes to Kabbalistic ideas at least. Rashi doesn't seem to allude to anything Kabbalistic, not in any obvious way, but the Ramban does. But nonetheless, he tries to stick to the pshat, the simple explanation, what's happening. The Balaturim goes a little bit deeper. He brings a lot of amazing. He must have an amazing mind, because long before there were calculators, he was using abacus probably, But the gematrias that he came up with and are recorded there are tremendous. But he makes a statement, and he doesn't really explain where it comes from. In this week's parsha, and he says, Pinchas zu Eliyahu, right? Pinchas, he's Eliyahu Navi. He's the prophet Eliyahu. How is it possible? Pinchas is Pinchas. He was born to Elazar. He was born, Elazar was born from Arlakon, who came from Elishaba's mother, and going back, in time. So, Pinchas, he's not that family line. Eliyahu, someone else. So how is it possible? So the truth is, if you look in Tanakh, you will notice, if you happen to pay attention, that Eliyahu's parents aren't mentioned. And that's because Eliyahu didn't have parents. He was not born. What happened? So it says that when Pinchas did the act of killing Zimri and Cosby, and he came out of him on his spear, that was also a miracle, that people could see that he did the halakha properly. He killed him in the act itself. Nevertheless, when they saw this, they said, how could someone like Pinchas, who basically had nobody to them, how is it possible that he could go ahead and kill a prince of the Jewish people? Because that's what he was, the prince of the tribe of Shimon. So how can they do that? It's a disgrace. Even though Zimri was Chayiv Misa, a good guy. The Gemara talks about it very disparagingly, but nonetheless, people took kind of like offense by the fact that Pinchas went ahead and did this thing, and as a result of that, they wanted to string him up. They wanted to kill him for doing that. And for one moment, Pinchas looked and he saw this lynch mob coming at him, so to speak, and it shocked him. He didn't expect that. I guess it doesn't say, but I assume, right? And it shocked him so much that for one moment, his soul left him, and he died, standing up. But it did not leave him so long as to let him fall to the ground that everyone saw that he died. But rather, for one moment, the shock, maybe it happens to a lot of people who just don't know it, right? But for one moment, the shock of what he saw caused him to die. And in that split moment that he died, his soul came back to him again, right? But because of the fact that he had done this incredible act on behalf of God to save the Jewish people, that he was rewarded. How was he rewarded? He got the souls of Nadav and Avihu, his uncle, Elazar's brothers, the ones who died in Parsha Shmini bringing the unauthorized fire offering. They died, very young, and they were the older brothers, and they died. What they were doing was wrong, and they were killed as a result of that. So their lives are very brief in the Chumash itself, but in Kabbalah, they're very prominent. And the Jewish people themselves, they mourn the deaths of Nadav and Avihu. And even from the Gemara, it doesn't sound like, it sounds like they had some work to do on themselves from the Gemara. right? But nevertheless, they are very important people. Special. It's so special, in fact, that according to the Arizal, that they're the source of prophecy for anybody who gets their souls. Now, you may recall that there are two types of Gilgulim. There are two types of reincarnation. The main reincarnation that most people are familiar with is the one where a person lives a life and they die, and they don't get out in that lifetime. Instead, what happens is the body gets buried, it is dead, and starts to decay in the ground, and will hopefully come back in the resurrection of the dead. But the soul moves on and is born into a new body, a new person. So we've been here before, right? Whether you realize it or not, we've been here before. This is not our first body, but our soul keeps coming back, hopefully get more rectified and more rectified and more rectified. We don't remember our previous lifetimes, that we feel like this is the first time we've been here, but it's not true. It's late in history especially. And that's the main type of Gilgul that most people talk about, that most people are familiar with. But there's a second type of Gilgul that's talked about in Shar HaGilgulim called Ibur, right? You may recognize the word. A Uber is someone who's pregnant, right? An Ubar is a fetus, is someone, inside the child that's being, formed inside the womb, right? And an Ibur, therefore, is a soul that, in a sense, impregnates a living person. In other words, the main reincarnation of your own personal soul into your body, it's the host's soul. That body, this body, needs that soul to survive. It's given you at 40 days from conception to give you life. And the moment that soul is taken away from a person, the body dies. That's it. It's over. The body cannot live without the soul. That's the main reincarnation. With Ibur, it's very different, because the soul, which is obviously not your soul, it's not your soul, otherwise at birth, the soul becomes in a living person. A person who's already alive has their own soul at the time, and then an extra soul. That's why it's called an Ibur. So it can happen as a way for Shemayim to get, for example, do mitzvah. They don't have the spiritual capacity to build. Therefore, a soul whose strength was that mitzvah, that the person wants to give them the actual koach to be able to be successful at that, and that's called an Ibur. But elsewhere, right, the Arizal explains that it's not so simple. It's not like Hashem just throws a soul down into the body, and as a result of that, you got the extra soul and extra siyah to the Shemaya. It turns out that soul will not stay in its own. Your soul that you're born with is attached to your body, and the truth is it also wants to leave. We're also fighting all of our life to keep our body and souls together, and that's a discussion unto itself. But this soul, which is not your soul, it's an additional soul, it's a guest soul, so to speak, right? That soul has less connection to the body, and therefore is much more free to run away, to leave the body. So how does it stay? It needs some kind of spiritual glue. So when Pinchas did this act, immediately after he did it and he died and got back his soul, he also got the soul of Nadav and Avihu. Now, even though those are two souls, in the Zohar, they're called one soul because they were so close to each other, they're so much connected that they were unique. Nadav and Avihu, that's why they're so close brothers. So they count as one soul. So even though he got these two souls, they count as one soul. To keep the soul, and that's when he got prophecy. The moment he got the souls of Nadav and Avihu, that's when he got prophecy. But that's the question how he became a Kohen. Both. One is because he now got the souls of people who were Kohanim, Nadav and Avihu. Okay? And second of all, since he died and came back to life, even though it was one split second, just one split second, that's what all it was. No one noticed it. If it wasn't for the Arizal, it wasn't for Kabbalah, we wouldn't know it at all. Because the Chumash doesn't talk about it, doesn't indicate that. But because he died and he came back, one moment later, he's called a Bria Chadasha, a new creation. And therefore, he now could be a Kohen. The blood that was on his hands is no longer on his hands because the soul left the body temporarily. And now, even though it's the same body, he's like a brand new creation. So now he has his own soul, which, by the way, is a combination of Yosef and Yisro, but that's a longer story. Okay, he has his own soul. He now has additional souls of Nadav and Avihu, and they want to leave. So they have, in order to be able to stay, it turns out, and this is the rule of reincarnation, I'm not making it up, it's not my own thing, right? You need an additional, another soul to keep that soul connected to the other soul. So therefore, we needed a third soul for Pinchas to get. And he got that. And what was the third soul that he got? It's called Eliyahu HaTishbi. Because every soul's got a name. Your soul is a name, my soul is the names that our parents give to us, as a result, also says in Shar Gilgulim, through Ruach HaKodesh, divine inspiration, whether the parents know it or not doesn't make a difference, whatever they decide, Hashem puts into their head, creates a scenario to make them want to choose that name, and they give it to you, it's the name of your soul. So the name of the soul is your Jewish name. You might get a secular name, because that's what people choose, but your body doesn't have a name. Your Yetzer Hara is a name, but your body doesn't have a name. Your soul is a name. So therefore, there's a soul up in Shemayim called Eliyahu Tishbi, and that soul came down into Pinchas, and that's what the Baal HaTurim is alluding to. Because the moment that Pinchas got the soul of Eliyahu Tishbi, so he transformed into Eliyahu the prophet, and lived for a very long time. He did lose it temporarily during the episode with Yiftach, which is a story unto itself. They're all stories unto themselves. Lots of stories to talk about. But basically, he eventually got it back. But again, now the same problem though. You have a soul that's now in the body to hold the other souls in the body, but that soul also needs a soul to hold it in. So therefore, he got a fourth soul. And what was the fourth soul called? Eliyahu HaGiladi. And these are the two names we use for Eliyahu. And the Gemara asks the question, how is that possible? Because Tishbi and Giladi are two different tribes. So how can Eliyahu belong to two different tribes? One from Binyamin, one from Gad, Giladi, right? How is it possible? And that's the answer, because they're two different souls. And they both came into Pinchas, and Pinchas had them both inside of him. So therefore he was Eliyahu Tishbi and Eliyahu Giladi. But at some point in time, Eliyahu Giladi goes to Shemayim. I think he's the one who goes on the fiery horse to Shemayim, right? And doesn't come back down again. But Eliyahu Tishbi, he's the one who goes up and comes down and goes up and comes down and dresses up as people. You don't know who he is. And most important of all, he's the one who heralds the final redemption, meaning he announces it. His job somehow, some way, is to say the Mashiach is about to come or is here, and let the Jewish people know is the advance announcement of Mashiach's arrival. And that's how Pinchas becomes Eliyahu in the process. He lives for hundreds of years, right? And eventually he goes up to Shemayim too. And that's the end of Pinchas, and that's the end of Eliyahu, except that Eliyahu comes back all the time for all the brissos. We open the door at Leil Seder to invite him in, to drink from that cup of wine that we end up pouring the next day, because probably by the time he gets to us, he's already had too much. And he's waiting to come and announce the redemption at the end of history, which is more or less around now. Now, it's interesting, very fascinating, because we are told by Chazal that there are 5 times in the Chumash that Yaakov is written Yud, Ayin, Kuf, Vav, Beis. Normally, the Vav is there the entire time, but it's a cholim, so therefore it's usually left out. So you only see 4 letters normally, Yud, Ayin, Kuf, Beis, but there are 5 times where the Vav is also there. Happens to be also that in Navi, there are 5 times where Eliyahu is written without his Vav, right? So you have Aleph, Lamed, Yud, Hey, Vav. That's why he's spelled Eliyahu. But there are 5 times. We always pronounce it Eliyahu, but the Vav is not there. So 5 missing from Eliyahu, 5 revealed in Yaakov. So this prompts Chazal to say, famous Chazal, that the 5 Vavs were taken by Yaakov, who came before Eliyahu, but since the soul was always there, it's not a problem, right? The 5 Vavs that Yaakov took basically as a mashkon from Eliyahu, to say that you better come. You better come at the end of days, because you won't get back your vavs. You only need one of them, really, but if you don't come, right? So I heard this week from somebody that one of the reasons why this was necessary because Eliyahu is going to see how bad the situation is going to be at the end of days, and therefore may be intimidated, won't want to come, won't feel that they were deserving to come. So therefore, we have to coerce them to come because of this mashka. A mashka is a guarantee, a surety, right? You think it as a surety, like you give the bank something, as a surety to make sure you pay back the money. So these vavs are surety. So that's one explanation. Another explanation here is that 5 vavs are like 5 fingers, kind of, the thumb also. So it's like a handshake. A handshake is a way to make an agreement. So it's, in a sense, there's an agreement with Yaakov and Eliyahu that he will come at the end of days, right? But the truth is, if you look at Tanakh, and right now I'm actually learning Hosea these days, and you read what's going on, and what went on at that time, as bad as things are today, it's been pretty bad in Jewish history. I mean, really bad at certain, periods, and we survive. We keep going on. Baruch Hashem. Yeah, there's a lot of churbanos, a lot of destruction along the way. Kosh Baruch Hu has definitely, vented his anger at those who are guilty. But certainly, Eliyahu himself had to deal with Achav in the Zavel because, and they were bad, really bad people. And those are today. It's thousands of years later in history. We don't have any prophets to guide us. We're 1,000 years after Har Sinai. It's amazing that anyone is from at all today, that we have any kind of Jewish connection today, given how long we've been living in exile and persecution and wandering and all that. But back then, they believed. They knew that God was God. They knew the Torah came from Sinai. They knew that there were real prophets who spoke to God. God spoke to them. And they still did what they did. That's real kafira. That's real, rebellion. So Eliyahu, he witnessed that firsthand. So what's going to be so intimidating about the end of days that he hasn't seen before? He's going to be afraid to come and redeem the Jewish people. Okay, whatever. But it's a chazal. And chazal say these things, and we got to take them seriously. We have to also learn from them. They mean something. So the first thing you have to, why 5? Number one, like why is 1 not enough? It only has one name. Let's take one vav and so you can't have it back. And why is it specifically 5? Vav is an interesting letter into itself, especially when it comes to redemption. Why Yaakov Avinu? Why okay? So Yaakov has a vav. So, Yitzchak doesn't. So and Avram certainly doesn't. So maybe it just doesn't work out. So therefore Chazal. But yeah, who says it has to be in Yaakov's name? They could just take the vav and hold it as a. You can't just read things and learn things like this on the surface. You have to go deeper. There must be something else going on. First of all, the letter Vav is hugely important in terms of geula itself, right? It corresponds to the sphere of Yesod, which corresponds to Mashiach ben Yosef. Vav is what connects the Aleph, the Yud, the upper Yud of the Aleph, and the bottom Yud of the Aleph. And according to the Zohar, that the vav in the aleph, and to combine the gematrias yud vav is 26. The gematria of Hashem, and the top of the yud points to Shemayim, and the letter aleph is like the word aluf, chief, which alludes to Hashem. Lots and lots of things to do with the aleph and the vav and all that. But principally speaking, the vav itself represents continuity. The idea of Jewish continuity, the idea of moving to the next world, all these different ideas, and geula, because that's what does geula really represent in the end? What is geula? Right? Galus represents, in a sense, the end of the Jewish people, God forbid. So that's why every time it gets to a point where the Galus is about to kill us, Hashem does something to end it, to stop it, to redeem us, if not completely, then at least partially. That's what they say. There's nothing better for the Jewish people than anti-Semitism because it wakes people up and it brings us back on some level, in some way. And the idea of the Vav is this idea of continuity. And you see from these Parshiyot the same idea, right? There's no story in the Chumash that spans 2 Parshiyot like the story of Pinchas. It starts in last week's parsha at the end, right at the end, and continues into this week's parsha. It could easily have begun in this week's parsha, and not in last week's parsha, but it spans two parsha. In the parsha itself, you have a pasuk. It says Achre Megefa, right? There's a you see a break in the pasuk itself. It's like an incomplete pasuk to emphasize the fact that was the break, the galus, the exile that Zimri and all the perpetrators caused in last week's part. They broke the relationship with Hashem, and Pinchas restored that. That's what Hashem says. Pinchas restored that. So this week's parsha is all about continuity. First of all, Pinchas he gets bris kahuna forever. Number one, right? Hashem promises him that him and his seed after him will always have it. That this idea, he becomes Pinchas, who becomes eternal also. He can live forever, whether it's a human being or whether it's a malach. But either way, he gets his continuity. But what comes right after that is the story of aside from the revenge taken against Midian, comes B'nos Slachad, right? B'nos Slachad, they're the ones who come into motion and say, we want continuity as well. Our father died in the desert, not one of those people who lost their chiluk in Eretz Yisrael. He maintains his portion of the land of Israel, but he has no sons. So what's going to happen to his land? His connection to the Jewish people and Eretz Yisrael will be broken. So either we should get it, right, or we should have to do yibum and stay in our family. So Moshe consults with the Kodesh Baruch Hu, and the Kodesh Baruch Hu says, yes, it's true, it goes to the daughters, and if there's no daughters, and it goes to the brothers, and goes to the Torah goes to a great extent to keep it in the family itself. So there's this continuity already by Eretz Yisrael. This is followed by the story of Moshe Rabbeinu coming to Kodesh Baruch Hu. Hashem says to Moshe, climb the mountain, take a look, you're not going in. After Mei Meriva, I don't know why the Torah always said repeat what the problem was. Not like we forgot so much, but it says you didn't sanctify my name by the rock and all. So he says, because of that, you're not going to Eretz Yisrael, but you're going to get a good look at it before you go. And it's more than just a look. He's going to put the kedusha of his own being into Eretz Yisrael. There's a huge, Kabbalistic thing about seeing the land itself, and having an hashpah on the Jewish people who go into the land. But then he turns to Kodesh Baruch and he says, please, he was thinking his own son, but the main point he was trying to make was, don't leave the Jewish people shepherdless. They have to have a leader. After I go, someone has to replace me. So Hashem says, you're right about that, but you're wrong about your son. It's not going to be your son. It's going to be Yeshua ben Nun, because he never left your side. He cleaned the base medrash. He organized the standarim and put back the svarim, etc., etc. And he's got the schus to be the hemshech of the leadership of you to the next generation onward, right? And then this is followed by the korban tamid. The korban tamid is literally the continual offering, the one that was brought in the morning and one brought by the Arbaim in the afternoon, day after day after day, all the time. So it's called the korban tamid because it was continuous. And then come the Chagim. And the Chagim represent the Jewish cycle of continuity. So you can really call this Parshas continuity. And this idea of continuity is really the idea of eternity. Even though it's an olam hazeh, even though it's only in this world. But when we have this continuity, it kind of rises above it. Everything in this world has a beginning and an end. That's this expression, right? Whatever has a beginning has to have an end, except the Jewish people, because they're not part of this world. As Elisha points out, everything about Klal Yisrael was lamalam neteva, was supernatural. The Gemara says it wasn't just that the imohot were covered; they had no children, and they wouldn't have children. They didn't have the physical means. Their bodies were lacking the parts necessary to have a child, and they still were able to have children in the end. These are the avos. Hashem made them. He can do whatever he wants. Why would he do that? Why would he make it that they would not be able to have children? The answer is because he wanted it to be clear to everybody that the Jewish people are, as much as they're walking the face of the earth with everybody else, they are l'ma'am l'tevel. They lived supernaturally. The Avos. Avram was conceived actually in a situation it was physically impossible. And Yitzchak, of course, it's right in the Chumash. And Yaakov, these are all we know the stories to teach us this. The lesson explains that's the whole reason why the Jewish people were led in the Midbar back to Yam Suf. They had already gone past Yam Suf. They're free of the Egyptians, free of Egypt, free of the sea. They could go straight to Eretz Israel. Don't pass go. Don't collect $200. They were brought back to the sea. Just so Hashem could trap them there and then split it to save them. Why? Just for a Saturday Night Show? No, because he's making this point. How Hashem changes Maisa Bereshis for the sake of the Jewish people. For better, for worse. For good and for bad. It's all for good. Yamzu Latova. It's all Kol Mandrachmanavid Latovavid. All that Hashem does, he does for the good. That's what we're told. So it's all for the good, but it can look like it's bad, right? Elections going directions they should not necessarily go, situations arising that don't make sense, not logically speaking, and it's for the sake of geula. Somehow it ties into the idea of geula, but again, supernaturally, because that's who Klal Yisrael is. That's the whole idea, and we're supposed to not just absorb this, but embrace it and live this way. Which this is a side issue. I mean, if you get stuck in the news, I've made this point before, but it's such an important, especially today. If you get stuck listening to what's going on in the rest of the world by people, for people who don't live supernatural or are not aware of this idea, it drags you down. Amalek, which they tell me has the same letters as Kamala, if you write Kamala in Hebrew, okay? I don't know what that means, they just pointed it out, right? Amalek was able to reach into the Aniyah Kavod and drag out the Jews who were not solidly there, who were like on the fringe, so to speak, and then attack them. We know what Amalek represents. Amalek is spiritual, is intellectual doubt that weakens a person spiritually and the connection to Kosh Baruch Hu. Yaakov Avinu says to his sons, gather around. Let me tell you about Achos Yamim. Abraham doesn't say that. Yitzchak doesn't say that. I mean, he doesn't have 12 sons to talk to, but he did have 2 sons. He had 1 son. Maybe he did talk, but the Torah doesn't say so. Yaakov says it right before he dies. Gather around and let me tell you about what's going to happen at the end of days. But we're told, by tradition, through the Gemara, that the prophecy left him. He couldn't give over the information. And some say he gave over some of it, but not all of it, or there's various different interpretations. But the one thing we do know from the Zohar is that a conversation took place. Well, actually, the Gemara talks about the conversation, but the Zohar explains it in a much more detailed way. The Gemara doesn't really indicate anything special going on other than the fact when Yaakov could not give over the prophecy, that he turned to his sons and said, listen, guys, I had this prophecy I wanted to give over to you, but it seems that God says no. Now, there's only 1 or 2 reasons why. Either because it's not right to give it over, or you're not fitting to receive it. And the Gemara says at that point in time, they answer back and they say, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. Hear Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. How is that the answer to the question? Because the problem is Yichud Hashem. The problem is that they didn't understand that God had chosen Yosef, and they took the situation into their own hands and ignored Hashgacha Pratis, divine providence, and sold him and caused all this balagan, that eventually led to 22 years of being away from home and all the struggles, and now eventually coming back together in Mitzrayim. So that they're saying to Yaakov, just like God is one in your heart, God is one in our heart too. What does it mean that God's one in my heart? It means that there's never a time when I forget about him. There's never a time when someone can say or do something, whether it's an anchor man in the news or some political figure or someone we like, someone we hate, does something, and for 1 second we forget that God is working through them. We don't give them independent existence away from God. That's what it means that God is one in our life. If at any point in time that you forget that for a moment, and you somehow believe that people, even Hitler, something like that, has power to do things against the will of God. That's not. You forget about God in the picture. That's called breaking the yichud of Hashem, going into yichud Hashem, and that's what a Jew is supposed to work on all the time to get around that. Yaakov answers back, I hear it. I hear what you're saying. Okay, but Baruch Shem Kavod Malchus Umbed, the second verse of the Shema. The second verse of the Shema. And that's it. That's the Gemara. It's like weird. Okay, no, I mean to us, I mean, what's going like why? Even if what they say is true, even what their answer is not so weird, it makes sense. If that's what the question was, is Yaakov really saying, do you guys, is God unified in your hearts and your mind? And they answer back by saying the Shema. That's fine. But what does Baruch Shem Kavod Machuso the Lamed have to do with anything over here, other than the fact that it's the second verse of the Shema? So the Zohar says, well, it's more than that. It's more detailed. Let me explain to you that really the truth is, you look at it, both the Baruch Shem Kavod and the Shema, they both have 6 words. And the Shema has 25 letters, because 25 is a huge number in Kabbalah, primarily to do with the Or HaGanuz, the light of creation, which is also the light of giving Torah and the light of redemption. It's the one that does all the miracles in creation. 36 is the other, whatever, it's revealed, so then it becomes the number 36. The difference being 11 between the two of them, which is the Das. It's a Hanukkah thing, okay? It's really true all year round, but it's primarily a Hanukkah thing. So, yeah, the Baruch Shem Kavod, though, has 24 letters. The Shema is 25, and Baruch Shem just misses by 1 letter, and we're okay. We're fine. 49 letters altogether. What's the big deal? 24, 25, this is the Shema, this is the So the Zohar says, no, Yaakov wanted to give Baruch Shem Kavod 25 letters like the Shema. That would have been ideal, but he didn't. He only gave it 24. Like he made it up on the spot. He made it, you say Shema, I say in response, Baruch Shem Kavod Malchus Lamed, blessed be the name of glorious King forever, forever. And he gave it only 24 letters. And in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Oh, short by 1 letter. Chaval. What am I supposed to do? All the letters are there. All the letters are there. Look at it. Sometimes, you get a word like Yaakov, which has a vav, but you can't see it because it's hidden with a dot, right? That's how you write the vowel, right? And then you can reveal it. So as long as it's hidden away, then Yaakov is 182. The gematria of Yaakov is 182. But if you put the vav in there, you have to have 6 more. So then it becomes 188. It changes the gematria. The fact that it doesn't change the sound, pronunciation, or meaning of the word is irrelevant. The fact that it changes the gematria, that's significant. So we don't have that. Baruch is written properly. Shem, there's no vav there. Kavod, all the letters are there. The entire pasuk has every letter it could ever possibly have. So there was no way to make Baruch Shem Kavod have 25 letters except for one way. Except for one way. There's only one place really where you could add a letter and it would make perfect sense, and not just make perfect sense, actually make even more sense than the way it is right now. And that's at the beginning of the word. You could actually say, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, Baruch Shem Kavod Machuso Lelamved. Add the vav at the beginning, and now you have the 25 letters just like the Shema. What's the significance of that? What's the significance of that? The significance of that is that not only do they match each other, but it's also saying that whatever the Shema alluded to, is also what's happening in the second verse too. So that doesn't make much sense, but Kabbalah explains, and it makes perfect sense after that. Because the Shema is not just someone saying, I'm devoted to God and God is one of my mind. It's a yichud. It's a yichud, as we said before. It's a unification of God's name. It's the vision of the angels who see God everywhere at all. They're never fooled. There's no screens. There's no veils. There's no nature to blind the person, to make them forget that God's running the world, right? The sun rises, the sun sets. We forget that God's involved. We forget that God, someone just told me earlier this week that I think it was Rav Hutner asked somebody, how do you know that the sun's going to rise again tomorrow? And the person said, because it rose today and yesterday, the day before that. He says, no, it could change any point in time. There's a pasuk that says it. I forget the pasuk he mentioned, but the pasuk talks about Kosh Baruch Hu making creation and the sun rising, sun setting. Even the truth of Shlomo Melch in Koheles mentions the same idea. It's a pasuk because Hashem promised that's the way it's going to be, because it can change at any point in time. The world can change at any point in time. It's not such a impossible situation. But it was a pasuk. It's an idea, a concept, very interesting, very fascinating idea. But the Shema is like, there's angels, they're never confused for one moment. They get it all right. Baruch Shem Kavod Machmed is, in fact, the yichud of the world below, where we live, down here. It's the vision of man. It's the one where we get fooled and we're confused. And people forget about God. Even religious people forget about God. And as a result of that, they lose perspective. They don't understand, what it is that what's really going on, and they get absorbed by the news and distracted by the news and what's going on in the event, and they got all caught up in it. And once you get caught up in it, it becomes your reality. You're subject to it now. That's very dangerous. But other people who remain above it remain safe from it, which is why the Zohar says someone who learns Zohar can be saved from Gog and Magog and Chavli Mashiach, because they're living in a different level, different plane of reality. And that's Baruch. So if you say Baruch Shem, that's the way we're probably going to say it in Yemos Mashiach, because in the Messianic era, when Hashem takes away all the veils and He reveals Himself, and evil's gone from the world, and there's no Yitzhak to lie to us anymore, we'll see the world as the angels do, and then He'll say Baruch, just like they have Shema, their clarity, Baruch Shem, the Vav there. So the Vav, really, what it represents, it's the connection of heaven and earth. It's the connection that between heaven and earth, and that's what Yaakov saw. The angel, the ladder, the angels go up and down in his dream in Parshas Vayetze, right? In that dream, that ladder was the vav between the two yuds, and the yud of Aleph is the upper chachma, the lower chachma, the shemaim and earth, and the vav connects them, which corresponds to the das. And das is Torah knowledge, and all the Kabbalah goes per days. I go all over the place with this, but the vav represents. That's why, for example, the word mashkan, which means a surety, right? It's really the word mishkan with a vav inside of it. And the mishkan was what was created to connect heaven and earth. In the midbar, just like the Beis Hamikdash connects heaven and earth. And what held the curtains up around the Mishkan? Vavim, hooks. But the hooks they're in the shape of a vav. So they're vavim. So it wasn't just a coincidence that they were called vavim, but that's exactly the point. The curtains were the barrier between the outside world of man, of the Baruch Shem Kavod, and the inside world of Shemaim, which is Shema Yisrael. When you enter the area of the Mishkan, it was Lamal Me'tevo. It's a whole different world. The vavim connected the two. So the Vav itself represents the connection between heaven and earth. And it's interesting because there are 5 of them, right? 5 of these Vavs. Why 5 specifically? So there's a couple of reasons why. But one of the most important concepts, most important ideas, the Gemara says that the world, the Olam Haba and Olam Hazeh, one was made with a Yud and one was made with a Hey. And I don't know which one, right? Then it brings a pasuk, Behibaram, right? With a Behibaram back in Parshas Bereshis, it says Hashem made them, all the heavenly hosts, excuse me. But Chazal Darshana Behibaram, with a Hey He made them. Alama said, why Hey? So the Gemara has a nice little taich that says because a Hey it's open at the bottom and it's got a little window at the top. Right, so it's a world where people can do averas, they can fall, but they can come back in, but you can't come back in the bottom the way you left. As the Rambam points out, you do tshuva to go to the extreme first. And that means going up and coming back in. So therefore I know that Olam Hazeh is made with this world, and the Yud is what Hashem used to make Olam Haba. Of course, the Yud is two Hayes, but that's the difference. The Hayes are composite. The Yud, as the Malral points out, represents the world to come because it's the only os, the only letter in the Aleph base that's not a composite of other letters. So it's simplicity, and the Matzah corresponds to that, the Seder, etc., right? But the Hay records this world. So really, what's going on in the end, this idea of the Mashkan, the Mishkan with the Vav, and, is basically an Eliyahu and Pinchas. And that's how Pinchas became Eliyahu. That's why Pinchas became Eliyahu, because Pinchas reconnected Shemayim and earth. That's what he did. God and the Jewish people. He was the Vav. And that's why the Vav inside the word Shalom is broken, because he'll lose that temporarily. It's an illusion of the future where he'll lose it temporarily. But overall, historically, that's who Eliyahu is. He goes back and forth between Shemayim and earth. He's the one who comes dressed up as, to test people. But he connects up, and that's why he's the one who heralds the final redemption. He prepares us for us because that's his job. That's who Pinchas was. He represents the idea of this continuity of the Jewish people beyond this world. And when we get involved in transient things, when we start to become more like the Gentile nations around us, which is what the whole push of the left and the liberals in this country and around the world, it's all over just Olam Hazeh. It's like literally just complete love affair with Olam Hazeh, completely disconnected from Olam Haba, from the world to come, from the ultimate goals of my separation. Olam Haba is not just a place we go to receive reward. It's where we go to fulfill the ultimate goals of creation that Hashem made this world. This is the means, corridor to get there. And that's what Eliyahu did. And that's why Yaakov is the one. Because Yaakov is the one who's connected. He's the one, he doesn't even die in the end. He's the one who's connected. He can tell you about Achris Yamin because he's got that sense of continuity. And in fact, Yosef closes his eyes to represent the ongoing continuity, Mashiach and Yosef. And the Vavs that he holds from Eliyahu is this idea of continuity. The 5 Olam Hazeh to transform into Olam Haba, to keep things been going. So that's why it's such an important concept, such an important idea, and why Eliyahu is the one who has to herald the redemption, and he had to be Pinchas, and Pinchas became who he became because of the fact he was devoted to become that connecting piece between Shemayim and earth. And every time that somebody does that, every time anyone does that, acts as a connecting piece between Shemayim and earth, they're acting on some level like Eliyahu. They have a schus, the Gra says, to be like Mashiach and Yosef. And that is the opportunity today. Shabbat shalom. Can't hear you.
Thank you very much for that. It was really amazing. I had all those questions about Pinchas and his connection with Eliyahu, and but his neshama, original neshama, though. This is my question. Did you say he had no parents?
Yeah, Eliyahu had no parents. He wasn't born.
He wasn't born, and he doesn't die, really.
Nope.
So is he floating around this world right now, other than going to bruises and things like that, which we always?
Yeah, because when he went up on a fiery chariot, he became a malach. He transformed from being a human being to a malach. Chanukh did this. Chanukh also, by the way, did the same thing. We don't hear about Chanukh so much, but the Medrash talks about Chanukh, the one who dies before, because it says Hashem took him before his time. He actually went up on a fiery horse and came back every week to guide the people. And he became the angel Matat. Matat, we don't say his full name, but he became the angel. He also transformed, became an angel as well. So that's what happened to Pinchas. He became Eliyahu, became an angel, and therefore never died.
And because of that status, that's why he is able to also, he was a connector, but he was continuous, had continuity in everything he did, and his connection to God. However, but I mean, does that mean that's what entitles him to being the one? He won't be Mashiach, though. He will be just.
No, he connects. He connects the two Mashiachs. He connects Shemaim. He's a.
Oops, sorry. I'm making meals for soldiers and people are dropping off food. Thank you. Anyway, Rabbi, I've got a lot more questions. We'll carry this out another time. It's already getting late. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And please don't forget to send this to your friends and watch the replays. You can look at the YouTube on israeltorah.org. Please listen to Rabbi Winston over and over again. Thanks for joining us, everyone. Good night and have a good Shabbat.
Sorry. Thank you.